In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Krebs, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 21st episode of the OSINT Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Krebs. This is going to be a special episode as I'm going to be covering 3 different newsletters in this episode. I was on a little bit of vacation, so we had some filler content. I don't want to call it filler content, but we had a free issue that was your typical free issue of a how-to guide for beginner investigators. Then we had an OSINT Tool Tuesday, which is something we're trying to definitely keep a regular pulse of. And then now that I'm back, there's another traditional episode or issue of the OSINT newsletter that we're going to be talking about, and an issue that covers a topic that I've been thinking about for quite some time. So I'm interested and excited to get into that a little bit later. But as a high-level overview, again, if you want to follow along with the newsletter, we're going to be covering issues 111, 112, and 113. If you're a longtime listener, you would know that if you want to follow along, it's osintnewsletter.com/111, /112, and /113 to follow along with the subsequent newsletters. The first newsletter we're going to cover is going to be titled You're Hired. OSINT and Company Intelligence. We'll be talking about doing business search and then getting information about corporations, organizations, government entities, things like that. And then the next episode, the next issue, is going to be issue number 112. That's going to be OSINT Tool Tuesday for a tool called IDEX. And then last but certainly not least, we have the paid issue, which is going to be issue number 113. This one is going to be talking about turning physical media into an OSINT archive and then using AI as a way to query and manipulate and deal with everything in that physical archive. So think about like a collection of books you may have, reference materials, whatever it may be, things that are typically difficult to find on the internet. How can you take that information, put it into some type of digital format, and then leverage the new modern tools that we have today to be able to exploit that information, process it, enrich the data you have, and be able to answer intelligence questions. So that's a high-level overview. We're going to start with issue number 111, then we're going to go into number 12 or 112, and then we're going to be going into issue 113. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. But before we dive in, some quick housekeeping as usual. We have a CTF that we publish every single week. If you want to practice your CTF skills, your OSINT skills, go ahead and head on over to ctf.osintnewsletter.com. Like I said, every single week we challenge different types of ways that you can use OSINT to improve your skill set. And then also we have tools.osintnewsletter.com. This is our tool set, and this is where we're going to be publishing a lot of our OSINT Tool Tuesday from. The overall vision or strategy of this is that we will have this ever-expanding toolkit that you'll be able to use to find tools that'll be helpful for you to add or incorporate into your investigations. And then we hopefully will have OSINT Tool Tuesday references that you can use to get a deep dive into each individual tool that we mentioned. Obviously, there are hundreds of tools into this toolkit at this point, so we won't be able to have a guide for each one, but what we'd like to do is, based on the engagement that we see with different tools, which ones are the most popular, we want to create a companion guide for them. So in this particular case, we have IDEX. That was something that was very popular among other, tools that we saw. So we went ahead and made a guide for that. So definitely check those two out, the CTFs and the toolkit. And last but certainly not least, go ahead and follow us on social. We're most active on X and LinkedIn. So check us out, x.com/OSINT Newsletter or OSINT Podcast. We have 2 different accounts, as well as searching and finding us, find the cat on LinkedIn with OSINT Newsletter or OSINT Podcast. So let's go ahead and jump in with those things out of the way. Okay, first up is issue number 111. It's titled You're Hired, OSINT and Company Intelligence. Now, since we are covering 3 separate issues in this episode of the podcast, I'm going to go ahead and do a higher level overview of the first 2 and then spend the meat and potatoes or the bulk of the conversation on the paid content. So, issue number 111, what is it about? It's company intelligence, right? We've done a lot of stuff over person search, finding emails, phone numbers, investigating IP addresses, a variety of other topics that are sort of the bread and butter for a lot of investigations that involve both people, places, things, etc. It all sort of comes down to an individual who's doing activity online. And if you're doing a digital investigation, you're really looking at things that are published online, and those things are often published by people. That may not be the case anymore with a lot of agents running around and publishing things on behalf of people, but at the end of the day, it can all be attributed back to a single person. So what is this issue about? It's giving you a high-level overview of things that you can find about corporations. So for example, when you're looking into a company, what can it reveal? You can look at things like company structure, right? Who's officially in charge of the company? What does, the org chart look like, if you will, of that company structure? Then you look at things like leadership teams. Who are the people that are involved at the high level in different departments within a corporation? This is information you can find online. And this is also information that is very relevant with understanding how people fit into an organization, who's talking to whom, who are some of these relationships that you can count on even from afar. Then you have things like corporate relationships, right? And as well as a few other things that we mentioned in this issue. And so I don't want to go into a very, slide reading version of this, but it's definitely something you should check out. One of the things that I really want to focus on are the OSINT tools and applications that you can use to find this information, right? So we have all this information about corporations, the people that are in them, how these corporations are structured or set up, but how can you find this information? So it's very difficult to find a lot of information in a lot of different countries, but in the United States and in the UK in particular, there's a lot of information in Companies House, for example, in the UK, and SEC filings in the US. You can pull a lot of that publicly available information, but keep in mind that this is going to be something for publicly traded companies or publicly registered companies that you see in the UK. When it comes to private organizations, you're not going to see SEC filings, obviously, because they're not doing any trading on the stock exchange. But most of the time, you're doing investigations into large-scale corporations or people who are doing, business with large-scale corporations. If you find yourself investigating small businesses or otherwise, that's a little bit outside of the scope of this particular conversation, but there's a lot of other variety of tools that you can use and techniques to get information about them as well. The next thing we talk about, beyond just the official documentation that you see online through like SEC filings, etc., is financial and aggregation sites. You probably run into a ton of these. You have things like Rocket Reach, you have Open Corporates, you have Sayari, you have a ton of different tools that essentially scrape a bunch of data online about corporations, aggregate them into profiles, and you'll be able to find things like CEOs, Glassdoor reviews, the number of employees, the amount of revenue that they have, their logos, their location, a variety of other information that might be relevant to you. And that's all information that's going to be really helpful with setting the context of who you're dealing with. One thing that is important to know when it comes to these financial aggregation sites is sometimes if they're not on these sites, that's actually important as well. If you're dealing with a corporation or an entity that you think might not actually exist, it might just be a totally bogus company, that information might, you not seeing that on these particular aggregation sites might be relevant because you're like, hey, this thing is scraping information about every single publicly traded company, every single company they can get their hands on as far as the data that's available online. If you're not seeing information on Open Corporates or Rocket Reach or any of these other things for a specific company, you have to ask yourself, why? Why am I not seeing this information? And that might lead you down to a different trail of information that you might find on the internet. So the next thing we talk about too is the corporate websites. And this is kind of like a no-duh, right? You have a corporation, they have a website. There's tons of information on the website about these companies. But most importantly, it's going to be the most up-to-date information. So with some of these aggregated websites, a lot of the information can be stale, can be old. You can assume that most people are going to be doing regular updates of their website because it's one of the number one lead generation opportunities for them, for business-to-business activity, for example, even B2C activity, for them to have an accurate, up-to-date website. One thing you can look out for is sort of the copyright year. If it's 2026 and you see that they're like copyright or the year that they place at the bottom of their website's like 2021, you probably can assume that the website is out of date. But if you see that as 2026, you have a pretty good sense that the information you're looking at is up to date and real. So definitely check that out. In the About Us section, you might be able to find contact information, phone numbers, email addresses, locations, images, leadership groups, things like that. Important information that might be helpful at a very high level, like 30,000 view of the company itself. So then we talk about in this issue, we talk about a clean workflow for running through an investigation and getting to a final conclusion at the end from an intelligence perspective. So Step number one, we do identity or the identification of official registration. So that's, the first step that we're looking at. Then we want to map leadership roles, who's all in the company, who's making decisions. Find the subsidiaries and the parent companies. That's step number 3. And step number 4 is cross-referencing the filings that you find and putting all of that information together. So that's sort of the 4-step workflow that we take you for this particular article if you're new to investigations. And then we also discuss common pivot points, right? Going from company to people, going from company to addresses and looking for information about addresses, going from company to partner organizations, for example, to be able to see more information like third parties, suppliers, parent firms, etc. So if you are new to investigating and you find yourself finding more and more information about corporations or getting intelligence requirements or requests for information about corporations and you're not really sure where to start, this is a great place to check out what some of the opportunities that you have. It's very, UK and US focused. So if you find yourself doing investigations into corporations or entities elsewhere, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult because information is not as publicly broadcasted. However, this is gonna be a generally good place to start. So if you're interested in this type of topic, again, follow along at osintnewsletter.com/111. Make sure to subscribe if you aren't already because we are publishing stuff like this every single week. All right, so that takes us to issue number 112 of the OSINT newsletter, and this is for OSINT Tool Tuesday. So again, if you aren't familiar with OSINT Tool Tuesday, it is a series that I started a few years ago where I would take a tool that was very popular, that was being used, or maybe a newer one that had a lot of promise, and I would write a guide on how to use it, what some of those use cases would be, and why you should use it, and different ways that you can incorporate it into your investigation. We're keeping that tradition alive by bringing that back. I ideally want to have at least one of these per month, ideally a couple, depending on the bandwidth that we have to produce some of these. But in this issue, we're going to be talking about a tool called IDEX. And if you aren't familiar with IDEX, let me just give you a quick background of why it might be relevant. So IDEX is sort of an open directory search engine. If you look at it, it kind of looks like Craigslist. From a UI perspective, there's just a simple search bar. There's a couple different options for filtering, etc. And what you get is you get tons and tons of data that is I think it's 3.6 petabytes of files, so like over 3 million files that are in these directories. And when we talk about searching the deep web, and this is not the dark web, this is specifically the deep web. If you're looking for information that's hosted within files, but it's not indexed by search engines, you're often going to find an intelligence gap, right? You can only find things that are hosted online and indexed by Google. So a lot of different articles, maybe references to specific data like PDFs or CSV files or SQL databases, but they have to be indexed by Google. They have to stay fresh. And oftentimes when they age off, like maybe something's 5 or 6 years old, it's gonna be difficult to find within search engines, right? This is why the art of search when it comes to OSINT is so relevant when it comes to being a skill that you can develop. But what IDEX is great for is, let's say that you have a variety of keywords that you're looking for. Maybe it's individuals, maybe it's corporate names, maybe you're just looking for general open-ended information like confidential information that might be published online. Maybe indications that there might be some type of leak or exposure, etc. IDEX is a good place for you to start. And essentially what it is, and it's very simple to use, and so the use cases are the most important part, is you can do a keyword search for something. You can group it by a type of information like a document or an extension like a PDF, a CSV, an SQL file, etc. And you will get a variety of information back. So I'm just going to do this live here. I'm just going to search for the word OSINT, no filters. I'm just going to see what's available. You're going to see a variety of different files that are dating back to, let's see, 2021. We have a date sorting field. So let's see, the most recent one, is 2021. It goes back to about 2017. So there's a variety of different information. There's some web pages, there's some MP4 files, so you have some audio, you have some text files, you have a variety of different things, but a lot of it seems to be maybe DEF CON related. We have some stuff that Joe Gray has published. If you're listening, Joe Gray, you have some stuff on here as well. Ryan McDougall's stuff on OSINT in the real world for DEF CON. A ton of information. Obviously, OSINT is a very basic keyword search, so maybe it may not be helpful, but there is overall 25 different search results for the word OSINT. Some of the stuff is coming from .com servers, some of it's coming from German servers, etc. But the point is that you can search by just a keyword and find a variety of information, and that information can date back several years. In addition to that, though, you can search for a variety of different keywords, and you can filter those by specific extensions. So if you're looking for a tool that's very easy to use, they can very easily incorporate into your workflow, IDEX is definitely a good place to start. In this guide, we talk about usage. We give you a couple different examples. We show you through the variety of different extensions that you can use from file extension. We give you an example like just searching for the word manual and then filtering by PDF. We also give you an example for file group filtering. So for example, searching for the word Microsoft and then filtering or grouping by the group documents, for example. And we just give you a variety of different tools and step you through how you can use the toolkit for different types of use case. And so what types of use cases is this useful for? I mentioned earlier, data exposure and discovery. This is something where it's like, hey, I want to see if there's exposed backups, exported databases, a variety of different information. You can either use this offensively, and what I mean by offensively is you can do it on behalf of another corporation. So you can say, hey, we're going to audit your site or your organization. We're going to see if we can find any leaks. This could be a potential source for you to say, hey, I found something on here. Or you could do it defensively and just flip that on its head. You could do that for your own organization. In addition to that, you can also use it for threat intelligence, right? The identification of leaked data sets, locate malware samples, a variety of other things that have been uploaded to this particular archive. And lastly, these are just general things, research and archiving. If you want to find a variety of information and just save it for yourself, maybe IDEX goes down, you lose all the access to that information. You can download all that information and then be able to search for it later. I'll actually be talking about that later on in this podcast about how you can leverage that yourself and not have to rely on third-party tooling to be able to make sure you have access to some of this information. And then the last use case is just corporate reconnaissance, right? And I mentioned this earlier, being able to search for a specific organization, see if there's new information that's added, and being able to notify respective parties that information has been located online and allow them to take action or recommend taking action that you can either do on their behalf or they can do within their own capabilities. So this is something that I think you should also factor in when using tools like this. It's just general OPSEC considerations. Don't download stuff off of this site unless you have it in some sort of sandbox. Like get a virtual machine, go into IDEX within your virtual machine, download some of this stuff, especially if you're dealing with like executables or some of those malware examples. Obviously, if you are in this space, you probably already know this, but just proceed with caution. You don't know like the nature of these files. They could be labeled one thing and be something else. There's not a whole lot of transparency around essentially like who is behind this and like, the technology that's underneath it. And there's not a whole lot of information around, what's actually in these links. Like if you click on a link, it'll take you to a specific page. They'll give you a bunch of information. But if you're downloading something, then you might want to, take an extra look. And it's better to do that inside of a VM instead of having to do that directly on your machine. So that's what the guide's for. And like I said, I think it's really useful both for beginner investigators that are trying to add different tools to the toolkit. But it's also going to be something that's going to be available for building redundancy or building a large bench of different tools that you can use. And there's one thing I want to check real quick just to make sure that I'm not overlooking it, is I wonder if I do search for it and see what I get back. So the good news is I think if you want to incorporate this into a toolkit, they do have an API that's powering their search engine. You're able to get some sort of information back. However, I do think it might be something that might have to be scraped if you need to do it. There's not something that's cleanly returned as a JSON object for you to be able to, directly integrate into a tool, but definitely something worth looking into if you're trying to add capabilities into a tool that you are building. So that's it for issue number 112. Again, go to osintnewsletter.com/112. If you see OSINT Tool Tuesday in the headlines of some of our articles moving forward, you'll know what these things are. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and move into the last part of the podcast, which is episode 113 of the OSINT Newsletter. All right. Last but certainly not least, issue number 113. Again, it's titled Turning Physical Media into an OSINT Archive Powered by AI. We'll talk about that a little bit towards the end, but I will talk about a few different news topics. I was able to get 3 in this issue, which is becoming more and more difficult, as I mentioned in the last podcast. As a high-level overview, though, how to build an AI second brain with Claude and Obsidian that gets smarter every single day. That's something you can read on X. I'll talk about that in a second. The second one is going to be how I track ships in the Strait of Hormuz. This is going to be a YouTube video that Ben Strick put together, which, he's always putting out great content for OSINT, especially in the age of AI where a lot of things are auto-generated. And then lastly, speaking of AI, the third one is going to be how to use AI to help find civilian harm. So let's go ahead and dive into the first one, and it's going to be the top of the list for the news section, which is how to build an AI second brain with Claude and Obsidian that gets smarter every single day. And this actually goes in line with what I was actually going to talk about in the paid issue of the newsletter as well, which is how to do this in a practical standpoint. So again, make sure you install Claude Desktop. That's the prerequisite of following along with this guide. Then install Obsidian. If you are in OSINT, you probably should have both of these already. I think Obsidian's like the best markdown reader tool that you can use. It has a lot of built-in features. It's free. The built-in features allow you to do all kinds of things, and I've typically been using it as the central hub for a lot of the projects that I'm working on. I store a lot of things in Obsidian, and then I point to that vault or that file structure within my AI tools, and then that allows me to keep things a lot neatly organized, and I can use a lot of different of the community scripts that are the community, what are they called, plugins that you can use for Obsidian in order to manipulate your information and make it seem a little bit easier to work with. So once you have those two things installed, then you have to use the local REST API, which is a community plugin. I'll actually talk about this later with something that I built out myself. Then you connect Claude to your Vault using that MCP server. Once you have the MCP server hooked up, you have the local API set up, you have everything like that. Then you sort of load yourself into the brain. So Claude is, and I actually talk about this later about doing it without having to use Claude. But essentially what you're doing here is you're pointing Claude to your Obsidian, brain. You're loading up the brain with as much information as you possibly can. And then from there, you use the built-in functionality like regex search, sorting, etc., that Obsidian has built in, and you allow Claude to essentially connect to that and do a bunch of things. So it has like a local memory and storage of all the information that you've gathered. And then you can just query against that instead of the World Wide Web so that you can get specific information only about the things that you've gathered. And the good part about that is that as you gather more information, you're going to have a treasure trove of data that's not available on the web that will be exclusive to you, which will give you the ability to answer very specific niche questions from an intelligence perspective without having to worry if this information has been indexed online or if it's been scraped by the AI providers or the LLMs that people are building. So this is definitely something worth checking out. I'll talk about this a little bit later. There's a little bit of redundancy here between what they talk about here. It definitely was an inspiration for the paid part of this newsletter. But they talk about, integrating live data like calendar and email information. They talk about putting all of that on autopilot, essentially creating tasks for your AI to be able to extract information from, add it into your vault, continuously build your archive until you have a massive amount of information. Obviously, it's going to be dependent on how much information you can store, but obviously the idea is get as much information into your Obsidian vault as possible, point Claude to your vault, and then if you have an enterprise plan or something like that, we're able to do tons of different like co-working type of agentic AI stuff. You can then spam your vault to get a bunch of intelligence or information from your vault in order to answer some specific questions. So as a precursor of what I'll be talking about later, obviously Claude can get very expensive. Once you hook up Claude to Obsidian and you're doing tons and tons of tasks, you will not be surprised to find that you have completely blown out your budget for AI spending over time. It's not a big deal if it's being sponsored on somebody else's dime. However, if you are a researcher or somebody who's doing this independently, obviously there's like a $20 plan for Claude. That's not going to cut it for very long. If you want to take this at scale, you're going to have to spend some money. But I'm going to show you a little bit later on how you can do that for free using openly available LLMs with a little bit of configuration. So stay tuned a little bit more on that. But yeah, go ahead and check that out. It's the first one on the OSINT news section. I would say that if you are having difficulties following along with some of the information that I'm going to talk about later, I would read this article on X first. There's a lot of background information that is relevant to what I'll be talking about here. And then once you understand that information, then you can dive into the paid section and do the how-to article and actually set up the tool that I built yourself to be able to do the things that I'm going to talk about. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the news section, which is how I track ships in the Strait of Hormuz. So if you are doing maritime tracking, especially when you're monitoring global conflict, there's a variety of different tools that are out there, and it's very difficult to go into the weeds of it if you aren't an expert in maritime geopolitics, if you don't have a rich vocabulary mentally of different vessels that are out there, if you don't understand like who owns which types of vessel, if you see a specific vessel of some kind, that it's associated with certain countries. This is like a massive amount of information you have to gather over time. You have to be able to have your visual recognition skills. You have to understand maritime policy and law. There's all these different things that go around being an expert in this particular topic. But from a beginner perspective, Ben put together this video that actually shows you how to track and identify ships in the Strait of Hormuz, which is the current conflict that's happening right now, and it's very relevant in the news, using tools like Marine Traffic, Vessel Finder, and I believe it's called Equasis. Maybe I've mispronounced that, and somebody can correct me. But there's also satellite imagery that's going to be available for you to be able to synthesize all this information together. And essentially what you can do is you can take a report that has happened, like you hear a report that a certain action or activity is occurring right now or has occurred. You can use these tools to be able to verify that information and walk through all of the facts yourself, so you don't have to specifically rely on what you're seeing in the news. So if that's something of interest to you, go ahead and head on over to YouTube, and you can either search for how I track ships in the Strait of Hormuz. I'd recommend just giving Ben a subscribe, because he's always putting out OSINT content, especially in video format, which is really rare. But you can also directly follow the link that I provide in the news section of the OSINT newsletter. It's the second one on the list. The last one is probably going to be the most advanced one. It's probably definitely something that's available for more sort of like your researchers that are more leaning on the technical side. But Bellingcat developed a machine learning model to automatically rank Telegram posts based on the likelihood of containing civilian harm. This entire article just sort of outlines all that specific information of what went into building that model. But essentially, I think the problem that they're trying to solve here is that you have so much information that's being published online. And there's so much noise, and you don't know what's spam, you don't know what's bots, you don't know what's real, you don't know what's not real, you don't know what's AI generated. So you have to have a way to sort of filter out the number of posts that you're seeing and only focus on information that might be relevant to you. And if you are trying to find information that's specific to civilian harm, you're going to have to manually go through a lot of information to be able to sift out the bad stuff. Like back earlier in my career, this is one of the things I had to do as a junior intelligence analyst. I had to monitor a bunch of information. I had to look for the signal in the noise. And then when I found the signal, I had to verify the signal. And then I had to report that up to my leadership so they can make decisions. If I had the technical chops back then, or if I had the tools available, I would be able to automatically sift through that, find the candidates that are worth even looking into, and then be able to make the decisions from there. And so that's sort of the problem that they're trying to solve here. And if this is something that's interesting to you, if you're somebody who wants to build tools that does something like this, social listening, or sentiment analysis, or a variety of other things, this is the OSINT context version of that. If you go to a variety of other different publications that are online for data science, machine learning, AI, etc., it's going to be a lot over people's heads. Also, it's going to be outside of the context of doing investigations, which if you're into digital investigations, that's a niche within itself. If you are interested in understanding this type of content within the lens of OSINT, this is the place to go. So definitely check it out. It is the third one on the list, but I found it very interesting, especially since it's something that I used to do pretty commonly, especially when I first got into tech, when I was working at places like Scope Now, Flashpoint, etc. Those are things that we were often wanting to do regularly, which is make it easier for people to find insight within a gigantic sea of noise. So that's it for the news section of the OSINT newsletter. Go ahead and check that out again if you want to follow along. It's osintnewsletter.com/113. Now, that moves us into the OSINT tools section. There are 3 different tools that I cover, and they're all pretty easy to use. I'll start with the first one on the list, which is called Discord Utils. If you are finding yourself doing investigations into online activity, especially when you're looking at subcultures like video gaming or a variety of other different things that are exclusively online, you're going to see a lot of users that are on Discord, right? It used to be that people were posting online publicly, and then over time, it was more difficult for people to publish online. They were getting moderated. They were getting a variety of other different things that added friction into that entire space. People moved to things like Discord, Signal, WhatsApp, things like Slack. There's a variety of different things that people moved into, but they moved into the messaging apps, and the messaging apps allowed them to, have a little bit more privacy. You could just have a username. You don't have to give a lot of your information. You can start, discussing similar topics with like-minded people, and none of that stuff would be indexed by search engines, and none of that stuff would be scraped, or it could be scraped, but not as easily by a lot of different people that were looking to scrape for information online. And so the question then becomes, as an OSINT investigator, is like, what do I do if there's people that are operating online? And I'm trying to find more information about them, or I'm trying to have just a general understanding of how Discord works. How do I learn more about Discord? How do I become a better investigator when it comes to looking into individuals or understanding the platform in general? And that's where this tool Discord Utils comes into place. Not every single thing that's on Discord Utils is going to be helpful from an OSINT perspective, but it will give you a general idea of how to investigate Discord, because it gives you a general idea of what features are available and what things can be turned into tools. So I'll just give you a high-level overview of the 9 tools that are listed here on the homepage. So the first one is the timestamp generator, converting real time to Discord time. So that'd be something that's useful if you're trying to do chronological type of analysis of when things were posted and by whom. You have a bot invite generator. You can generate a bot invite URL with permissions. So that's another thing, like, again, not super useful for OSINT investigations, but it'll tell you sort of what types of activity you can see on the platform. But here's where things kind of get interesting. You have a user lookup. You can get a Discord user info by the ID of that user. So that'll be obviously helpful from an OSINT perspective. But you also have a variety of things like embed builders, markdown previews, webhook testers, snowflake decoders, bot token checkers, role color pickers. There's a variety of different things that, again, are not going to be helpful for OSINT, but they will help you learn the platform, and you might be able to better understand contextually some of the content that you're seeing. Once you understand how that content is being generated, like embeds on there, like creating rich Discord embeds, right? How are those things generated? Well, once you see them, you're like, oh, I know what that is. That's an embed. That's how they're made. Here's the types of information that I know that I can find within those or associated with them. So it's definitely something worth checking out. Again, it's the first one on the list. It's called Discord Utils. The second one on the list is a GitHub project called Email Crawl. And similar to a lot of other projects that I mentioned in the past, it is an email-related OSINT tool. It is a multi-tool. It does a variety of other things besides just doing email checking. But here's the interesting part, is it does a lot of the manual work that you typically do as far as like gathering emails and being able to validate them and being able to extract information from them. I'll give you a couple examples, right? So once you put in a site, you have to extract all of the emails from that site. That can be a difficult task to do depending on how large the site is or what type of restrictions they have. Email Crawl will extract email addresses automatically for you. Then you have to validate the emails. Are these bogus emails? Are they burners? Are they actually connected, or are they real? So it also has an algorithm in there to be able to filter out false positives or any type of invalidated emails. Then there's things like username extraction and domain analysis, right? So you can pull the username off the front end of a email address and be able to investigate just the username across platforms. It'll do that for you. And then the suffix of the email, that a specific domain, if it's not a Gmail or Yahoo, etc., it'll also be able to do analysis there. And then lastly, it'll be able to generate reports for you and give you actionable intelligence all in a single wrapper or a tool. So you start with the URL, you crawl all the emails from it, you extract all those emails, you validate those emails, you pull the information out of them, you do the analysis, and you get the full report. This is something that is not very common with email tools, and it's also not very common with username tools. So this kind of puts everything together. One thing that I really wish they do, which I'm not sure that it does, not with the examples I tested with, is once you get a username check, I wonder to what degree they're able to pull information out from those username matches. So if you're able to match these to specific profiles, can you get profile pictures? Can you get display information? Can you do analysis there? Can you group by can you group by face recognition to all the platforms that have the same person in the profile picture? Can you group by first and last name matches or near matches? Can you group by locations? These are all things that I think would be awesome ways to add value to the tool. But if you're looking to investigate, websites at scale, we talked about, doing corporate investigations earlier on in the podcast. If you want to point this thing towards a domain that is being owned by a specific corporation, then you can extract all the information out and use this tool to do some of that company research that we were talking about earlier. So definitely check it out. It's the second one on the list. It is a GitHub project, so it requires a little bit of configuration, but again, you can just clone it, point your Claude desktop to it, and have it do all the things you want it to do. You can even add functionality if you want to, if it's missing some features that you're looking for. And that brings us to the last one on the list. It's called X-Resolver. It's very similar to Discord utils, except it's for gaming networks. So if you're looking at Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, different types of places or different types of information you can find related to people who game online, X-Resolver is a cool place to check out. I will start as a disclaimer that some of the tools weren't actually working. It seems like they have a maintenance problem of some sort. But again, the most important part for you to check out is what types of information is available when it comes to investigating people online through gaming networks, right? Like what types of information can you find from Xbox Live about individuals or similar? What types of information can you find about people when going through the PlayStation Network? So there's a couple different tools, and I'll just kind of step through these. You have an Xbox Resolver, a PlayStation Resolver. What does a resolver mean? You can essentially put in a username and get an IP address. You can put in an IP address and get a username. These are kind of dangerous tools. This is how you lead swatting, right? Is people figure out who the username is. They don't like them. They figure out their IP address. They get their location. Maybe they match the IP address to a phone number or an address, and then you're into some bad territory. But if you're trying to do investigations for ethical reasons, this could be a very, very powerful tool for you to use. In addition to these resolvers, they also have IP loggers, what's my IP, phone number lookups, breach checkers, a variety of other things that you want to check out. So definitely give them a shot, especially if you find yourself sleeping on Xbox Live or PlayStation Network as an OSINT resource. And that brings us to the end of the tools section. So just as a quick recap, we have Discord utils, we have email crawl, and we have X-Resolver. The core theme here is figuring out, hey, where can I get information in places that I would not expect? Discord and video game networks are the first two for the tools section. So getting information from Discord, better understanding how these platforms work, like Discord, Xbox Live, PlayStation, etc. And then email crawl is kind of a nice companion to the company search that we were talking about earlier, where you can just point it at a domain and crawl a bunch of information and scale out your corporate investigations a little bit easier. So with that, let's go ahead and move into the paid section of the OSINT newsletter. And again, it is titled Turning Physical Media into an OSINT Archive Powered by AI. The first news article that I mentioned essentially said, put everything in Obsidian, hook Claude up to it, do a bunch of automations with Claude, be able to essentially have your own personal assistant with Claude and Obsidian being sort of the Library of Congress, if you will, of all your information. My challenge to that is it gets very expensive over time, and it's just you don't have a lot of control of like what Claude is doing. There's a lot of connectors. There's a lot of like upside to being able to use Claude for this. But I think that if you are a small independent shop, you don't have a huge budget to use AI, and you're worried about the costs of AI going up over time. That's why I wrote this section about turning physical media into an OSINT archive. The first article that I mentioned that points to an article on x.com also does not specifically call out physical media. It calls out just collecting all information that you possibly want and putting it into Obsidian. What I'm going to talk about here is physical media. And I've mentioned this before, is that oftentimes with open source intelligence, we rely on information that we say is publicly available. And we automatically assume that that's information that is online, that is on the internet. But publicly available can just be what's available at your library, what's available, at any type of government building that might have media that you have access to. It's not just what's available on the internet. And sometimes we have to remember you have to get off the internet to get some of the good stuff. And when I talk about the good stuff, I talk about things that are specifically inside of physical media. So quick little story from back when I used to do a little bit more monitoring that I mentioned earlier, which was we were looking a lot into fringe online subcultures. And there was a lot of terminology that was really weird. There was a lot of like references that were super weird. There was things, and what I mean by weird is just like uncommon. If you search for them online, you're not getting a straight answer. You end up on Urban Dictionary a lot. You end up in a lot of different places where you're like, I don't really know what this is. And I found myself like explaining to like baby boomers and older Gen X folks like what some of these terms mean. And it just, the whole thing is kind of confusing. And what I started finding out was that there's people that specialize in this stuff. There's academics that, research these topics, they publish books on it, and then they sell a book, and the book has all this information about, adventures from 4chan or 8chan or whatever it may be, or, very, strange I don't want to call them like subcultures, but like, countercultures from like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, all kinds of weird things that are just like, they come up over and over again online. And the reason why I bring them up is that you might see a reference to something and it looks totally benign, but it's a reference to some cult that was popular in the state of Arizona in like the 1990s, right? And so like this person's referencing some pretty fringe stuff, but you don't really see it because you don't understand the context. But that context is written down somewhere by people who research these things. And they often don't publish articles. Not everybody publishes a blog. Not everybody has information that's scrapable off the internet. You have to find it in books. And when you go on AI and you ask for information that might be found in books, you're not going to get those answers. And you're definitely not going to find them when you Google. And if you Google, you just have to pay for this stuff anyways, right? So the question is, how do you get around that? And how do you stop yourself from having like 3,800 books that you've never read? And you have to ask questions. Because like another thing too is you have the book, you have this nice collection of like, cult content. I keep saying cult, but like anything that is, unusual activity that isn't really posted online. It could be stuff that you see for terrorism groups. It could be stuff that you see for domestic terrorist groups, not just foreign ones. It could be like weird stuff all the way to like furries and a bunch of other, fringe, online subcultures that you see that are, using unique terminology or using references from things that often are difficult to connect to. You have all this information and you have all these books that are associated to them, but you're not going to spend the hundreds of hours it may take to read all of these 250 to 300 page books. So what do you do, right? What do you do? Well, what I'm proposing in this article or in this post that I have is that you can take all that information, you can have it scanned, or you can find PDF or digital versions of those things, and then you can put them all into Obsidian in a markdown file separately. And then you can build an infrastructure that allows you to use a free LLM to specifically just query the information within your archive, connecting to your Obsidian MCP through the local REST API. So what am I talking about here? So at a very high level, I'll just kind of, walk you through the step-by-step. You gather all of your physical media, right? Just buy like 5 books or just take 5 books off of your shelf. There is a website called $1scan.com. You can send those books to $1scan.com and they will scan them for you in very, very high resolution. They'll send you back a digital copy of them in addition with your books back. And then you'll be able to upload that to Obsidian and save that as a markdown file. You can do OCR, you can do a variety of things on these files. You gather a giant trove of them and you organize them, the same way that you would organize your library, your physical library. You'd put all the different types of content together. And then what happens is you go to the next step. You hook up your Obsidian MCP by getting the local REST API community plugin, which is mentioned in the first article in the news section, but I also give instructions within the paid article that I post here. You get that all configured. It's very simple to do. You just download the plugin, you enable it, you get your API key from there. Then you use OLlama. OLlama is an open source model selection tool, for the lack of better terms, that allows you to use a variety of different models, including Llama 3.1 and the one that I specifically use here called Qwen 2.5. The reason why I chose Qwen 2.5 is it's very good with instructional based commands. I want you to do this exact thing and nothing else, and not very interpretive commands like, hey, I want you to write a story about this thing, right? It's just like, hey, do these tasks. I put that all together and I built a tool called QNote. And what QNote does is it allows you to upload all of your digital content into your archive, which is your Obsidian Vault. You can manage all of your archive on there. And then you can go to your settings, you can configure your API key, you can point into the right vault, you can kind of manage it more easily there. And there's a step-by-step guide that I add into the tool as well, that you can check it out if you choose to download it on GitHub, which I have it for free. But here is the main reason why you want to do it. I spent a lot of time experimenting with the configuration of Qwen to give you very concise responses to your specific questions. So when it came to getting specific information, I got a PDF version of a book called Kill All Normies, Online Culture Wars from 4chan and Tumblr to Trump and the Alt-Right. This is a book that you're not going to be able to find specifically indexed, or you can't find specific content within it be able to be recalled by LLMs that you get out of the box, like Claude, for example. But if you get the PDF version or you get a scanned version of the book, you upload it to your Obsidian Vault, then you can ask this chatbot that I built and I've configured for specific questions, like the questions I ask it, what is in my vault? And it tells me exactly what file is in my vault. And then I ask it, what does it say about 4chan? And it gives me a very concise answer as to what that specific piece of content says about 4chan. And the reason why this is powerful is that once you gather a ton of information, you have it nicely organized, right? Let's say you have like books about 4chan, books about 8chan, books about Boko Haram, books about Al-Qaeda, books about whatever groups that you have that you want to get like specific content on. And I mentioned counterterrorism and I mentioned counter-fringe stuff online. But if you want to start there, you'll be able to essentially query the chatbot, get specific information back, and be able to use that for your investigations from an insights perspective and not just rely with exclusively what's on the internet. So at a high level, that's essentially what the paid section is about. If you want to use the tool and look at the technologies that were behind building the tool, I definitely recommend checking it out. Again, it's osintnewsletter.com/113. And again, before I close this out for today, make sure that you check out the CTF at ctf.osintnewsletter.com. It's going to be related to this post, as well as our tool set, which a lot of these different tools are going to land on there as well. So again, make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you enjoyed it, but that's all I have for this podcast, and I'll see you again in about 2 weeks.